So this is another laser review slash laser giveaway, and I apologize, these giveaways, the intros have to be long because there's a lot of stuff I have to cover to avoid repetitive questions in the comment section, as also for liability purposes. So as I've stated before in all these giveaways, these companies reach out to me to review their laser. I have 2 lasers in the shop. I don't want a bunch of lasers laying around the shop. There's really no need for that. So instead of hoarding them to myself, I've decided to turn the tool reviews into giveaways once I fulfill the promise to the companies to do a tool review. So that's what these videos are. The laser I have today is another Jiccoda. If you watch the channel, you know the first Jiccoda I tested was one of my favorite lasers. This one performs pretty nicely as well. So the difference between the 2 Jiccodas, they're the same price on Amazon, they're different model numbers, and obviously they're completely different designs, but they're both 10-watt machines. So I think it really comes down to style choices for choosing between the 2, and like I said, they are very different. So for this, like I said, there's going to be a tool review where I kind of discuss some of the pros and cons of these machines. I've tested enough of them, I've kind of picked up on things that I prefer and things that I don't like, and those are usually the things I pinpoint and discuss, and then I put them to work, and there's always a build at the end of this or some sort of product produced so you could see how these machines will function in your workshop. In order to enter the giveaway, there's no purchase necessary. If someone contacts you asking for money, it is not myself. You do not have to pay anything to enter, and you do not have to pay anything to get the laser if you do win. You just have to leave a comment. The contest lasts for about a week, and then I have a program that I just input the URL of the YouTube video into it, and it randomly picks a winner. I notify that winner, and I send out the laser. So I have one more. I've just sent out the Sculpin and the Atzer this week, and then I have the winner of the last contest chose the Orter. So I have to take that apart, and I'm sending that out in the next couple days, and then there will be this one. After this one, I have no other lasers in the shop. However, I am communicating with 3 more companies about getting more lasers, but no promises on that. That process can take some time, and just because I'm emailing with someone does not, I've been ghosted by companies, things haven't worked out, but I don't think this will be the end of the laser reviews and giveaways, but it will be for at least the time being. So like I said, this was a pretty solid unit. I say that about all the units. Keep in mind, I'm only testing these for a minimum of about 2 weeks, but not much longer than that, especially with these giveaways. These companies have pretty strict guidelines of when they want the videos to come out, and I already usually bend all of those timelines as it is. So when you're looking at all of these lasers, I guess my best advice is, so far, like I said, they've been performing pretty well. But if there's a model you like, I would try and find someone on YouTube or someone in the reviews that uses that model all the time. Unfortunately, these can work great for 2 weeks, and then a month from now they could stop working. So unless the people that win them come and leave updates, there's no way of really knowing how long these last. But so far, I've had no major issues with any of these lasers I've tested. And aside from cut times, the final product is all pretty similar, and I don't think anyone could pick out which laser's cutting which from multiple test pieces. So this is the newest laser I'm testing out. This is another Jiccoda. Other than a difference in model numbers, this one's an L1, and the one I tested previously was an LE-1. There's not too much difference. They're both 10-watt lasers. Obviously, if you watch the videos, the design of these 2 are completely different, but they're both 10-watt lasers, and they perform similarly. This one kind of boasts online about being able to be hooked up to Bluetooth, and a lot of these have the capabilities of, some of them even come with apps you could download. To be perfectly honest, I have no interest in running these programs on my phone. It is a nice backup option, I won't lie, but I don't like doing stuff like that on my phone. Honestly, a laptop screen is sometimes even too small. It's much easier to work on larger screens when you're messing around in stuff like Lightburn. So I haven't tested any of the apps on these things, but that is something of note if that is something you are interested in. So like I said, this is a 10-watt laser just like the other one. The main differences are going to be design. They're completely different and they utilize completely different systems. So this one, like the D1, like the Atzer P10 I had in here, and the Ortur, are starting to use these low profile frames with the belts, continuous belts hidden inside the frame. Some of these, this one and the D1 and the Atzer, they already come with the belts wrapped around all of the wheels and the motors, and there's tensioning screws in the back. But honestly, this one I put together and it's been working fine without tensioning it. So if build time is something you are considering, these sort of models go together easily within a half an hour, and you could have it set up in engraving that quickly. Sometimes the low profile is not my favorite because if you're doing anything of substantial thickness, you very quickly have to raise the whole module up. I also don't love, they do sit on these rubber feet, but I do like the ones that have some sort of exterior L bracket to bracket these to a table, because sometimes stuff happens. I'm working in the shop, almost every single one of these videos I knock into these, because especially these ones and especially the ones I'm giving away, I don't want to do anything to them to mess up the frame because they're technically not mine. So that is a drawback to that sort of model. But otherwise, this model, the D1, like the Ortur Laser Master 3 and the Atzer P10, they're very streamlined pieces. They're also starting to utilize almost V-grooves on the top. This one has rubber wheels instead of metal wheels, but that will generally last longer, which I do like. And as you can see, this is a working wood shop, and I don't have the time to make enclosures for these, especially enclosures for ones I'm not keeping. So these ones with the continuous belts inside the frame and the wheels riding on rubber instead of on top of the belts, I haven't had any issues with the wheels slipping and ruining designs, which I was having a huge issue with the frames that have the exposed belts on the top. So that is a plus. This Jiccoda, like the other Jiccoda, does wire control the best out of any laser I've had. And ironically enough, they don't even use the same design that works so well on their other model. They use these almost coiled old school telephone wires that keep everything tight because of the coil, but they have the ability to stretch. It's super clever, it works great. I had no problems with wire control. I actually had to buy a drag chain for this one that I haven't installed yet because the wires stick out the side, and I've actually had multiple projects ruined. I kind of have them tucked. I have a wider honeycomb bed in this than is needed for the machine, and that kind of helps keep the wires tucked on the outside of the frame because they were getting caught up in the gantry and stopping the machine and pulling boards and messing up products. So the way that they handle the wire controls on these is really nice, because that could be a huge issue, and the drag chain on the other one was really nice as well. As far as drawbacks, I don't love, they have this kind of, all the wires meet where you have what I'm assuming is some sort of stepper motor here, and you have to install these, and I'll try and keep as much of this together as possible. These limit switches for the x-axis and the y-axis is over here as well. It's kind of hidden behind these wires. You can see me hitting it there. That one will hit this little peg here and tell it to stop, as well as the module hitting this one and tell it to stop. I just don't love all the exposed wires. They're super small. It's very easy in a working shop for stuff to get hung up. It'd be nice if this was in, some of these models come with like little enclosures that all this stuff is run into and then run out of, and you don't have to deal with it. I know certain stuff like this, it makes the price point more manageable, but I don't love all the exposed wires. And as you'll see in the video, I'll discuss this more in depth in the video because it was one of the first issues I had. hooking up air assist to this is a little bit of a pain. It's nice to put all these decorative fancy covers on everything and make them look streamlined, but then you really have no access points to use some of these air assist modules that the companies have sent me. All the hookups didn't really work with this one. And then the last thing of note on this machine, because it has been a sticking point for myself on some of the other machines, is I do prefer these ones where the laser focus adjustment is attached to the machine, because I don't have to worry about losing it. So this one's a little knob that turns down. There's a thumb screw right here. You can loosen it and tighten it, and this goes up and down. So you could set your height adjustment and then flip the knob back up and tighten that thumb screw. So super simple there, and I prefer these ones. There's all different styles, but in general I prefer the ones where this is attached to the machine. I do not have to worry about losing it in the shop. So I ran into my first issue with this machine fairly quickly, and that was there was no great way to hook up the air assist. I highly recommend using air assist and a venting system with all of these machines, and this is a popular aftermarket thing you could buy for these. I have a couple of these in the shop because different companies have sent me them, and it's basically a rubber hose that hooks up to the air machine, which pumps air out and blows dust and whatnot away from what you're cutting. It's a simple little nozzle that can wrap around the module. The problem is the ones that they sell, this has this decorative cover on the outside of it, and it's just too wide for the unit to fit around. You can see if that decorative cover wasn't there that it would fit. The problem is on top of that is a fan. You don't want that exposed, so that blue cover has to stay on. There's also no outlet whatsoever on the protective cover screen for the laser. So I'll link a video in the description for whoever wins this laser. This is an option for them, is that a person drills a hole in the side. I didn't want to do this because I'm giving this laser away. So all I did was I cut a piece off of one of the modules I had, and it's a double thickness, so it was able to use those flanges to go on the back side of the laser, and I was able to put the tube through that way. A little bit of electrical tape on the outside holds it in place, and I could put it back into the gantry. It's not obstructive in any way whatsoever, and then I could use the air assist that way. That seemed to work for this. I will ship this. This is an example of the component that the guy uses in the video. He has to cut a hole in the side, but I will ship this with the modification I made if someone wants to utilize it. But like I said, I will put a link in the description on how to permanently modify the bottom side of this for anyone who wins it to hook up that air assist. So you can see I made it work, but it is a little frustrating with these products. They're just not universal, so be careful about that. So this is one of the first manuals I saw where they tell you specifically to power off the machine after a certain amount of time of cutting. They also tell you that the service life is a little bit greater than 10,000 hours. So I did crunch some numbers real quick, and if you have 10,000 hours, we're going to do the bottom of the scale here. 10,000 hours, let's say I'm running it 8 hours a day. So I'm going to divide 10,000 by 8, and that will give me about 1,200 hours. Divide by days in a year, and that will give you about 3.25 years. So 1,200 days divided by 365 will give you about, so we're saying about 3.5 years is the bare minimum. They're saying these machines will function if you're running it 8 hours a day. I've seen online that people have said upwards of 25,000 to 50,000 years. I point that out because I thought it was interesting. I haven't seen manuals. Number one, and I'm not going to lie, I haven't fully read all of these manuals. This one was right in the beginning, but number one, that tell you to power down the machine to give it a break, and you'll see that actually happens later in the video, as well as a rough guideline to how long they'll last. So this is just, I first set up this machine, I homed it right away, I hooked it up to Lightburn, and this one worked right away without any changes. If you watch these videos, the first thing I do is I do a quick engraving of my logo. And that is just going to very quickly tell me if the machine can home, if the machine can frame the design, if the belt tension is working, and also if the laser is working. So it's a nice starting point for all of these machines, but it also will point out any glaring issues with the assembly of it and if the laser is working quite quickly. So some of my adjustments, sometimes light burn goes through, and when you input images it kind of gives you automatic cut times and whatnot, and sometimes I have to go through and change them. So you could see like the atom stack, it started engraving dark lines. I quickly shut off the machine, changed a couple settings, and then I had my logo engraved. Now, like I said, I do these quickly. That's why some of them are darker than others. I don't spend a lot of time doing this because I'd rather spend more time working on projects. So I recently found a file that will cut puzzle pieces, and I actually really like jigsaw puzzles, and I thought it could be a pretty cool thing to utilize. So I went through and I have some engraving tests because I was going to be cutting this out of 1/4 inch plywood, and I did that first to give me some basic settings for cutting. This ended up being somewhat fruitless. You'll see later in the video why, but originally this is what I used to do to get some quick test cut settings. You could see it's telling you what the laser will cut and at what power will cut through the material. The reason I'm using 1/4 inch is because thinner plywood with the heat of the laser bends quite substantially. So the thicker the plywood, I thought I wouldn't have an issue. So the puzzle pieces are just a file I bought on Etsy. I think it was $2 or $3. I'll show that file a little bit later in here. And all I'm going to do to start is I'm going to engrave my logo, and then I'm going to cut out the puzzle. So just quickly to see if I could get this to work, I have some initial settings based off of that test piece, and what I'm going to do first, because this was a little bit of a chicken versus an egg situation, but I assume that engraving this first would work better than cutting the puzzle pieces first. So you can see the output in light burn. You could set it so it will only output certain parts of your design, because I had a feeling that if I cut the puzzle first and then engrave, the engraving would turn out wonky, because obviously you're going to lose some thickness in the cut. I don't always show this in the videos, but as you can see with all of these, I'm always running a vent out my window, which is that big black fan, as well as air assist, and I highly recommend everyone does that as well. So now you can see a little bit better the engraving qualities of this laser, because I'm doing a rather large logo. This actually might be one of the bigger logos I've done. Pretty straightforward at this point. These little pins I have holding the piece in place were a lifesaver. I found those when I was using the D1, and the plywood I was using was very thin and bending a lot. This is a great way to hold down your material if you have a honeycomb bed. It doesn't flex or bow at all, and the laser doesn't get hung up on it. So I'm just going through a process of obviously showing this engraving, and then once that's done, at this point I was, like I said, I think the air assist was working pretty well because I didn't have any major burns or anything like that on the engraving, and that was a nice engraving that the machine put out. And then I outputted the puzzle so that it would cut the puzzle. The problem with that is I wasn't really paying attention, and you could see the outer circle is cut before the inner puzzle pieces, and I really want to cut that last so that none of it moves. So I will change that I do a couple more of these test pieces. And I'm always working on something else in the shop. You don't want to leave these lasers unattended. I've seen some horror stories on Reddit of people's catching fire and they don't notice about it. So I'm always working on something else. I'm not necessarily staring at it. And I didn't notice that it was going too slow. So if the laser goes too slow, you'll get this issue with burning. You can see how poorly some of these pieces burned on the bottom, and they were just way too loose. So I made some adjustments to the setting. That cut test worked out fine, but I guess on a larger scale piece, it just couldn't show me ahead of time that that laser was moving too slowly. So I actually found the paper I had from the tests I did on all the lasers, and I started messing around with those numbers, which worked a little better. So you can see on this one, it was the exact same process, a new engraving. I cut the puzzle pieces first, and then the outer circle that will cut out the whole piece, and then I can take this off. And obviously this one worked much better. I still wanted to hone in a little bit on it. It was burning a little bit towards the bottom. I think I had to do 3 passes on this to get it to go through the 1/4 inch. So one of the nicer things about the more powerful laser I have in the shop is it cuts in quicker passes, so you won't have as much an issue. So you can see substantially better. The one on the left is obviously the one that burnt quite poorly, and then the one on the right is the nicer one, but I do keep fine-tuning these, especially the engraving was coming out fine. It was more so the cut through. And then I put some clear coat on here just to get a better example of what it would look like. And at this point I was pretty happy with this. I thought this was going to be a pretty cool process. So for the official puzzle I did, I kind of settled on the Golden Girls, just because who doesn't like the Golden Girls? And they're so popular, there's so many images to pull offline, so I was able to find a JPEG pretty quickly. And what I want to do is I want to delete the background so that I could see it won't cover up the puzzle piece. So I do this in Photoshop. I just duplicate the layer, I delete the original layer, and then I use the magic wand to delete any of the background. You'll see when I import this into Lightburn why this is important. I realize a lot of people probably don't have Photoshop. There's open source programs that are free online that will most likely be able to do this simpler photo editing stuff on there. But I've had this program. This is a very old version of Photoshop. It's got to be at least 10 years old. And I've used it before I even had a wood shop, and it just comes in handy, especially now I'm using this program. I save it as a PNG, and then I could import it into Lightburn. Click OK, and I could save that on my computer. The nice thing about this was I was specifically looking for a graphic image. This will so this is just the puzzle file. You could see how many puzzle piece files that you do get, and when I upload this, it's grouped together. So this one I'm pointing out now is the one I used for the logo. I'm going to try a couple bigger sizes for the Golden Girls graphic. So I have to ungroup the file because they're all grouped together. I'm sure there's an easier way to do this, but then it's just a matter of I go through and I delete the ones I don't want and narrow down the sizes. But like I was saying, this program will engrave JPEGs or raster images, but it works best with SVGs or vector files. So the Golden Girls is obviously a JPEG, but I wanted a graphic because the graphic won't have as much detail as a photo. So I was assuming it was going to engrave nicer than a photo. Photos can sometimes have to really mess with them to get a clear image, and you'll see I was right about that. So the engraving on this photo is going to take, I think that said like an hour and a half. So it does take a substantial amount of time, and it's not really, with the cut as well, it's not really a huge photo. So for the first one I was working a little bit smaller. I wanted to make sure it would work because it is a big time commitment. You'd see it just came out a little bit too dark, and obviously the grain of the wood is going to affect the darkness of the pattern. But then I went through and I still cut this because I wanted to make sure the settings I had changed would work on this. So I already had the piece. Whenever you see me pushing down on something, that's just me checking to make sure that the laser is going all the way through the wood. Because this is an organic material, sometimes, almost on all of these lasers I've had an issue with, it will go through in 99.5% of the piece, but sometimes you'll get little spots where it doesn't go all the way through. But this is that puzzle. You can see most of it goes through. It's just that one corner I was having problems with. So I was trying not to take this all my pins out and move it, which is why I'm taking it apart piece by piece, but I ended up having to take them out anyway and move it. So you could see usually it goes through just enough, and you'll have to use like a razor blade to just get rid of those last little tabs on a couple little spots. But that is the basic puzzle. You can see it's a little bit smaller than my hand. I was pretty happy with how the puzzle cuts. It's just a matter of fine-tuning the image. I tried a couple things, but basically what I ended up doing was, you could see the original is on the left, the modified one's on the right, and I just brightened the photo quite a bit. And that worked pretty well. There's people that I don't do a lot of engraving, so there's people that know this a lot better than myself. So this was going to take about 2 hours, and about a third of the way through, the laser just completely stopped working. I didn't heed the advice of the instructions, and I had been engraving at this point all morning, testing, and these pieces were taking quite a large amount of time. So I didn't know this, but apparently you can go in your window preview and you could set this to start engraving at a certain point, which was a time saver because I did not want to restart this. You could see this job is going to take over 2 hours to do the whole thing. So I did not want to start from scratch. So all you have to do is drag that little slider to where you want it to start and say start from here, and I was able to save this project by restarting from where it was. What I have read is, especially if you're engraving raster images, which is a JPEGs, this is similar, it's a PNG, and apparently static electricity can build up in the module and they'll shut off. So that is something to consider when you're doing this. But like I said, I was able to restart it. It is a little off. You can kind of see it's off a fraction of an inch, but unless you know the laser stops, you probably wouldn't notice it. And since I'm going to be putting a bunch of lines on this image anyway, I don't think it's anything anyone will pick up. But you can see this is a much clearer image by going in and messing around with the brightness and adjusting the image and playing around with it. Like I said, if you're really interested in engraving, there are people that do a ton of videos on this sort of stuff. But my hunch of a graphic coming out clearer was right with this. I don't think you would have had as good of results if you were doing a photo. You could see the backside. I was playing around with inverting the image. That didn't work, and then I just flipped it over and I changed the brightness. Once again, I have a couple little fins sticking, which I'm not going to lie, that does get a little annoying. But like I said, I don't think that's the laser's issue, and I didn't want to send it through multiple times and have the back burn. But you can see it's a pretty nice little puzzle. Everything's flat, it fits together nicely. There's not a lot of play in it. It holds itself together. And then those are the 3 samples. And this was multiple days of engraving and cutting to get to this point. The only issue I had was I think I was using it too long and had to shut it down that one time.